Hey guys, welcome to the next Toolbox, Stunt Rigging Toolbox talk. I think it's 34 or whatever, I have to look it up. I'll add it up, maybe 35 now. What I'm going to do is I've talked twice now about slacklines. We're just going to button it up because there's so many it depends, but you need to know the proportions and relationships. That's the only thing that matters on these, because you can use them for big, tall travel, you can do them for short safety or short travel. You can do all these things with them, but unless you understand the relationships between the weight, the angle of the pulleys, the height, and the distance, unless you understand those relationships, you're never going to make them work right, okay? So, to summarize all this, height is your friend. The higher you make them, the farther apart you can come and create more linear travel, okay? If you have a short distance but a very high space, then you're going to have a very light weight, because this angle, the flatter this gets, the more this weighs, okay? All these things hinge on your angles here, your pulling mechanism, and what you're trying to do. Are you trying to lift this? If this is 100 kilos, then at some point you're going to be 3 times that when it's this flat. You have to consider what your working height is going to be. If your working height is 4 meters or 3 meters, then you calculate if that's working height for the person. So if the person is here and your leaders are here and that's your shiv, so you're 2 meters off the ground, your actual final height's 6 meters. So you're going to need to set these up based on a correct amount of travel at 6 meters. Okay, so that's going to tell you how wide and how high. Most of the time you can't backtrack. You're stuck with a stage that's got a 12 or 15 meter ceiling. So then you take your heights and you backtrack how much, what can I do given the height? With a crane, you say, how far do I want to travel? And you set everything accordingly. Remember, you're never going to get more than about 40% of the distance of the pulleys in travel under ideal situations. And you're never going to get more than about 40%, maybe 50 if you're lucky, with the height. And I'm saying maybe because as you come in tighter, you have much less weight here. By pulling in more line here, you can get higher without reaching that offending flat angle that's going to limit everything, okay? Plus, the tighter these are, you can play the pendulum. So that means if they're tight and tall, you can start way off center, and you'll have to do takeout, as you come from back here, you pull up, you will pendulum, but you'll be able to keep them flat because they're rolling in this V. So you'll be able, if this is very tight and it rolls in the V, you can keep them level and they will have more speed. Okay, the tighter your V and the more offset from center you have, the more travel speed they will have. Okay, so it becomes a dance between, do I need a motivational force because of the speed they need to see? How high do I need to make them? How long do I need to travel them? Okay? And there's the things that govern this. Whatever your force generating mechanism is, whatever your height is, whatever your width is, and whatever your weight here is with what you're pulling. So you have to set it so your angles never get shitty enough to make this too heavy for your system here. Okay, because remember, once you get to a high line, a straight line, you can multiply the forces exponentially. They're infinite at that point. That 100 kilo on a flat line may be 6, 7, 8, 1,000, maybe a ton or more. So you need to look at that for your anchor strength. You need to look at that for everything. It's really, it sounds complicated, but I can't do it here. I would go out and go through a step-by-step, set up a long one, set up a short one. But the interrelationship between these is what makes these work. And if you fuck one up, you'll find it's too flat and too short for what you want. You'll get nowhere and have no speed. Ideally, what happens is on a set, you're stuck with a red's height, a perm's height. So you have 12 or 15 meters to the reds. So that's going to govern right now. You already have a height set, period. That's as high as you can go. So from there, you have to look at what's my travel got to be. Okay, if I'm 15 meters, that means I can take them, if that's 15 meters, half of that is 7.5, that's 25%. So I might be able to get 8 meters high. 8.5. Okay, and that's to the shiv. Now, minus the liters and the height of the person, you're 5.5 meters off the ground, 4 meters off the ground. Okay? So you have to start looking at that. If your height is already dictated, that already gives you one set of these numbers. Then for the angle, since it's at 15 meters, you know if you go 30 meters wide, you're going to be fucked. You already know that because it's going to be too flat at 6 meters high. And if you can't do the math, it's easy to just get a piece of graph paper and make it in squares and draw it out and proportion it. You'll see where you need to go from, where you need to end up. You'll be able to measure the angles, but you have to look at this interrelationship, okay? The narrower, the closer together you put the pulleys, the more you can work the pendulum. It becomes a two-line pendulum. The only difference is, as you come from this side and swing out, you can pull up and keep them level and let out to set them down. So you have some advantages there. Another advantage is if it's high and narrow, this weight is much less. If it's high and narrow, you can offset this almost under your pulleys and achieve a lot of different effects. When it gets wide and not so high, that's when you start having problems because this weight, because of this angle, becomes multiplied. For every bit you move these pulleys out without increasing height, this gets heavier. So then you come into what can I lift? I need to help save somebody in a hallway going against a wall. I need to make them light. I need to get them to stick and hold them up, and they weigh 100 kilos. Well, it's pretty flat line. You look at your angle on your flat line, you go, oh shit, you're gonna need 300, 200 kilos to do that. You need to start looking at how you're pulling that slack line or that loose tight line or tight slack line, that shitty geometry, how you're gonna tension that up. You're just gonna have two people pull on it and make sure they lock it in the clutch and drop them from there if they need to come down. How are you gonna do that? So this dictates how you do things. This overall interrelationship. It's very simple, but if you change one of these things, it changes the whole thing. So remember, your biggest points to consider: height, distance, and weight. Because weight will dictate the forces that you're generating and the forces you need to deal with. One last thing I'm going to say. I never use a single slack line. I don't. And sometimes on set, on a little hand pull pop, I might. But generally, especially on these big ones, especially on flat ones that have a very bad relationship here with height to distance, I will use twins, parallel lines, not an English reeve, one over the other. I will use them side by side so they divide the weight of this over two. It's no harder to put up two parallels than it is to put up a single. Another thing I will mention, since you've divided the weight by two, if they're flat, this may be quote unquote 300 kilos where it's flat, but now each line's seeing 150, and that's at its peak height, and now you could put two people on each line if you want to do that. There's ways around this to divide your forces, mechanical advantage. One of the few things I will say is if you're going to run, and I run duals, I also do it for the reason of redundancy. Do not run this as a single through a shiv and then back down to a point. Basically, it's one line. You will run two separate matching systems, which is why I said, see, this pulley is tied to the floor because I use two adjustable situations over here, rigs, MPDs, Harkin clutches, some form of adjustment in this, because that way I can get both lines tensioned correctly. If you're flying an object in two lines and one's tighter than the other, the object's going to lean one way or the other. It's going to tweak. Especially imagine if there was a piece of truss between those, you would really see this relationship. Okay? So you need to be able to adjust that tension. On that end, I have that. On this end, it's redundant. Both pulling forces are separated. Okay, they're two independent and separate lines. This gives you redundancy. If one fucks up, you've always got a second. The most they'll do is swing to their side but still be supported by the single line. Okay, and that's, God knows what might happen, but allowing for redundancy. You have a backup plan. Plan B is one can always support them, two is better. The addition of these two lines means you can tension them, move them wide enough to tension them diagonally. So now they can flip and rotate and everything, plus you don't have the pendulum effect as much. Now you can create it because you have two separate lines, two separate tensions, so you can tension them differently. You could go to the far end and bowstring in series. Bowstring one side, they'll swing one way, bowstring the other side, they'll swing back the other way. So you could do this with double lines, okay? Because you have a system to manipulate the lines that way. The addition is also, like I had on this last gig, I had a big flying prop that the person was on, so I had to fly it. Metal construction, 100 kilos, 50 kilos, whatever. I think it was 50 kilos. So what I would do is I would put the prop in before I put the performer in, tension the line so that it hung level, and then bring it down, load the performer who had his own double lines to both, so he had safety lines going to the skates on both sides. So he's redundantly backed up, and then flew the entire thing over a vast distance. Now you have backup, safeties, balancing, and the ability to puppeteer and move someone to make them look like they're flying. And that's with twin lines that are manipulated, okay? So these are all issues to think about when you run these systems, and you can get pretty sophisticated with them playing games with flying. And you can get a lot of movement. And because you can pendulum two lines, especially if you can change their heights. If you can adjust this, you can create this. Okay, so these are the issues. So this is mainly redundancy is what's important. You have a safety. If anything fucks up, you've got two lines holding that person up. So I'm not a proponent of a belly shiv on one side, run them in a loop, and then back down on the other. Because if one breaks, they both are gone. Okay, I always take both to the ground. It's just string. Just put more up. Okay, now you're backed up. You're safe. Your performer's backed up. Whatever you've got in the air, you have doubles of everything. And it's not getting in the way, and in fact, it's helping you. It's giving you stability. If you want that person facing in that direction and not spinning and tweaking, people put them on spreader bars, and people put them, it defeats the purpose, because then they're doing this. If you want them to go, you can control their body position, their directional stability, all of that with twin lines. You can put them in tension in the V. That way they can summy if they want. They can do a million things, but you have them in a V tension, which is holding them steady. You can fuck with that V. You can manipulate that V by raising and lowering lines and create this if you want it, but you won't have rotation, okay? That's the thing you don't want. Now, if you need rotation, you can bring both to a swivel, and then it gets into how do you back that up with a swivel. Then if you're really going to do that, you could run one over the other. If you're sacrificing this for rotation, you'd English reeve it one line above the other and not have them in a bridle from the sides for stability. But at least have a redundant line. You always need redundancy. So remember, it's not just stringing one line in the air to do this. It's two lines. Two lines pays off in reducing what you have on these pulleys, so they share the weight between. So if this is 100 kilos in this setup, it could be, it'd be in reality on both ends of the pulling force, it's 50 on each. They're sharing it, okay? And as this angle gets worse, they're still sharing it. It's not going from 100 kilos to 300 kilos, whap, as you get to a bad angle, okay? You're splitting it, or you're dividing it. You're using a mechanical advantage, okay? So these are all issues to think about when you run slack lines. There is no hard, fast rule, but like I said, there is no hard, fast rule, but you have to go by what you have to work with. Height, distance, weight, and what's your pulling force. And most of the times, height is dictated to you. You can set distance, and you can dictate over distance how heavy that's going to be. Then you can go, okay, it's going to be too heavy because it's too flat, so I'm going to run two lines. Oh, I also don't want him to spin, so I'm going to run two lines. Okay, so you work through the steps, okay? When you have a crane and they just say, I want to fly him from here to there, you can, no problem, put a couple 100-ton cranes out there and send the boom up 50, 60, 70, 80 meters and send it with twin lines that are adjustable. Oh, we'd like to see him do some swooping in the air. No problem. 2 guys on the anchors, bowstringing it. No problem. We've got this thing that he's not sitting level. Well, I have adjustments for that. I have service loops on this side. I can tension them independently and create perfect level flight. Okay, so these are all the things to look at when you're playing with these lines. I'm not going to get into any hard, fast numbers, but just percentages. You're going to see generally 35-40% of your height. You're going to generally see 35% of your distance, maybe a little more, 40. Then you start going to motivation lines. The tighter your belly is, the tighter your pulleys are, the more you get speed. It's in a pendulum. The longer the pendulum, the slower it is, the shorter, the faster it is. Well, it's the same thing here. And the tighter your pulleys get, given the height, if you've got the same height, the tighter they are, you're going to shorten this up and be able to swing longer. You'll get a flat spot in the middle. You won't have as much travel. Okay? They're interrelated. Your distance creates the distance you can fly, but with every bit of distance you need more height. So are you limited by height? Are you limited by distance? Are you limited by performer height? You pick your system based on your limitations. And then each set comes with its own consequences and its own requirements. So that's how you proceed, step by step by step, down through this. On a stage, you know, you've got this height. You know, your hallway or your room is this long. You know that, so once you know those things, you know what you can and can't achieve using this system in that setup. Because if you only have 12 or 15 meters to deal with, and you can only go with that angle with a 100-kilo person in a handbull so wide, that's going to tell you how far your distance is going to go. So you can set it up accordingly and put your belly where you need it for the travel. Okay, and remember, you always work from the middle. So you can offset them to one point, travel them to the other, but it's going to be equidistant from that center point. Okay, so these are the things that all play into your decision of how high, how wide, how heavy, what's my motivation force, do I need a motivating line, do I need a braking line? Because the pulley, I can offset all the way, and it's so narrow that when I pull it, it's a full pendulum, and they are hauling ass. And do I need to slow them down because I can't travel that far on the other side? Okay, I have a wall I need to put them against, but they want them to go fast. Well, great, you better put a stop line or a braking line on them so you don't stick them through the wall. So you work it one step at a time based on height, distance, weight, travel, all of these things, okay? So I'm going to stop beating slack lines to death because I'm kind of done with it right now. And it's Saturday afternoon. I'm in the workshop, done. So y'all have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you again.